Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Piotrowski. I'm a Community Impact Officer here at the Hartford Foundation. If you're joining us this morning, this is the Latino Endowment Fund's RFP info session for their 2023 grant making. I just wanted to point out that I believe Sue Dana is here on the call with us. Sue Dana is a Director of Development here at the Hartford Foundation and works closely with the Latino Endowment Fund Committee. And I actually have in my office, Romy Garcia. She is a development manager here at the Hartford Foundation and also works with the Latino Endowment Fund Committee. And I do believe I see at least one.
Yes.
I'm sorry? I do believe that there's at least one steering committee member here on the call. If you so wish, feel free to do like a Zoom hand wave or thumbs up or what have you. I certainly welcome you. Hi, Ara. I welcome you to jump in. If there's some questions that may pertain to the committee or its background, certainly feel free. As some context, I work on what we call our community impact side of the Hartford Foundation and support the request for proposals process. But mainly Sue and Romy work closely with the committee themselves. And it looks like Romy will be joining us soon. Apologies for that. She was having technical issues and that's why she was sitting in the office. Just so everyone knows, I am recording this info session and the recording will be circulated by email to all attendees and will be posted on our website. So if you have to hop off early, don't worry, we'll get this recorded for you. I'm going to take the time for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so just to describe the Latino Endowment Fund if you've not heard of it, give a bit of its history. I'll keep it brief and focus mainly on the scope of their request for proposals for this year. The majority of this time will be used for you to ask questions and hopefully I can answer them. And if not, perhaps a committee member could, or Sue or Romy. So that's what this time is mainly here for. As some background, the Latino Endowment Fund began in 2003 to focus philanthropic giving for Greater Hartford Latino residents and to improve their quality of life in the Greater Hartford region. I believe since 2003, their giving has amounted to over $150,000. And their fund value is somewhere near $500,000 now. I know things are a little bit wonky with everything going on economically, but that's around ballpark where the fund value stands. For some context, if you're familiar with the Hartford Foundation, typically requests for proposals are initiated through our community impact side. So what we would call our unrestricted grant making, where staff tend to make decisions on how philanthropic giving is spent and allocated. With a giving circle like the Latino Endowment Fund, the decisions are led by community members who become committee members for the fund. And so each year, members will donate a minimum amount to contribute and advance the fund so the fund can continue, and they attend things like educational sessions, gathering feedback from the community, perhaps a bit of research, and then they also engage in their annual grant making. So for this year, they've put out a request for proposals that will offer grants up to $20,000, and they expect to award somewhere around $40,000. So you can guess that that means perhaps 2 grants for the amount of $20,000 would be given, or depending on how the requests come in, perhaps it would be more than that. But the ceiling would probably be nowhere than $40,000 total, with a maximum grant amount of $20,000. Each year, the request for proposals might vary in its scope and its purpose, and that has happened again this year. The Latino Endowment Fund helped commission a study by the Hispanic Federation a couple of years ago, and that PowerPoint is listed on our website with the RFP announcement. I'm going to link it here as well in the chat, just in case you haven't had a chance to look at it. But they're actually using this this study to help frame the scope of this year's RFP. So this study looked at equity disparities among Latino residents and other racial or ethnic demographics, just to look at where there are gaps and where there are needs. And in that study, they identified many gaps, what they describe as equity indicators, but the PowerPoint itself probably focuses on 5 major equity indicators. A lot of them are linked up or connected in many ways, but the 5 primary equity indicators are educational equity, economic equity, digital literacy equity, health equity, and housing equity. And what the Latino Endowment Fund is seeking this year are projects that will address those equity gaps, and in their project description that you're able to describe the project and describe how it's addressing that equity gap. And in theory, perhaps providing rationale on how that project is minimizing that gap that's identified compared to other racial or ethnic demographics in the region. Letting some folks in the waiting room. I think what will be really important is, again, sort of what I just said, but really being able to emphasize how that project is linked to that equity gap. That's helpful for the committee as they review applications so that they aren't necessarily making that leap on your behalf of linking the project with what it's purporting to address, but that you're describing that in the project description for committee members to help, really underscore and strengthen that link as they assess the application. Yes, I just got a question in the chat. Can I please list the 5 equity indicators? It's educational equity, economic equity, digital literacy equity, health equity, and housing equity. As you might imagine, some of those are linked. In that PowerPoint that I just put the link in the chat, there are some equity indicators that probably would fall under one of those 5 buckets, like school poverty was one that could certainly fall under educational equity or perhaps economic equity. So there's a lot of connections that can be made, which is why I think it would be very important to be able to draw those connections within your proposal. And if I'm looking away from the screens, I have 2 screens, just so you know, so I'm like kind of bouncing between looking at you all and then looking at the RFP. I'm also going to drop the RFP announcement in the chat in case you haven't seen it. Again, it's also on our website under grant opportunities for this year. In the RFP, it also discusses proposal requirements and eligibility. For this year, we will want to be able to see grants that address one of those 5 equity indicators. If you are unsure of whether or not your proposal will address one of those 5 equity indicators, you can ask that here now. You can email me afterwards or schedule a time to talk. That certainly works too. Other eligibility requirements: organizations applying must be a registered public charity, a registered 501c3 nonprofit. If they are not, a community group or entity can apply, but they will need a fiscal sponsor, which would be a public charity, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We cannot legally disperse funds to an organization that is not a registered 501c3. And so that organization can serve, in theory, as fiscal sponsor to more than one organization who's applying if that happens, but we will only accept one proposal per acting organization, if you will. It's really important to share this. It is highlighted, I think, in the RFP and on the website. Funding eligible organizations will be those that are either led by a Latino executive director or the proposed project is directed or led by either Latino, could be program director, artistic director, what have you. The Latino Endowment Fund Committee made it really clear that they want to prioritize their giving to organizations that are led by either a Latino executive director or program director. And we listed some eligible types of programs. This is not an exhaustive list. It could range from workforce development within the Latino community, or increased employment opportunities, post-secondary advancement and completion, so obtaining, post-high school degrees or certification, efforts that support Latino entrepreneurs, neighborhood beautification, which could address housing equity, elements of accessible healthcare, or community healthcare, community health institutions, etc. That's not an exhaustive list. It's sort of just to get the wheels turning, and give you a sense of what the scope of the RFP actually looks like. And in terms of the timeline, we are here today, the 31st, at our scheduled info session. The proposal submission deadline is Wednesday, February 22nd at 11:59 p.m. I would suggest not waiting until the last minute in case there's a glitch or something happens, because you will get locked out right on 11:59 p.m. We will ask the finalists to offer a PowerPoint presentation, a very brief one, to the LEF committee members on Thursday, March 30th in the evening. The finalists will be invited at least a week and a half prior to that date. And then the first week of April, we anticipate the grant awards being announced. I will pause there. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. I'm looking at my notes. I don't think so. So I'll open up this time if either Sue or Romy from the Hartford Foundation have something that they want to add. And if not, we will open up the remainder of this info session for questions you may have.
Hey, I just added to the chat, the finalists will be invited to present a brief presentation during a virtual meeting on March 30th. And they'll be notified, I believe, on the 25th.
Thank you. Yes, that meeting would be a virtual meeting. And the finalists, it typically is usually the 2 or 3 top applications will either, they'll be notified, some of the parameters of the PowerPoint presentation, whether that's like a 10-minute presentation and time for questions and answers, etc. Some more details will be given to those who will attend that committee member meeting. So I have a question in the chat. In order to qualify, does the executive director or program coordinator have to be of Latino descent? That is correct. You can certainly make a case and apply, say it's not the program director, but perhaps the program manager. I would argue that you can still apply and make a case for that. I'm pretty aware that the Latino Endowment Fund committee members do want to prioritize giving their funds to organizations that the program or the org itself is led by someone of Latino descent. And I think that they're aware that that can limit viable projects that could otherwise apply. I think that that's a priority for them and where they want to focus their giving. But I think if you have concerns about that and think that you could still make a strong case of perhaps a project lead or significant staff member on that project is of Latino descent, I would argue that it may be worth applying, but it may be risky when it comes down to the committee members reviewing your application. Along that lines, I actually, before we continue with the questions, I do want to screen share for just a moment. Typically, I don't like screen sharing because I like to be able to see everyone and in the chat, but we will be using a rubric to initially score. Can everyone see this Word document? Someone can give like a nod or a yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. So this wasn't originally posted with the RFP announcement. This will be circulated with the info session recording, and it will be posted on the website alongside the RFP announcement under our grants opportunity page. This is an initial rubric that committee members will use to assess applications. There's 6 items that they're scoring. Can folks see it now?
Now we can see the RFP. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. So that's the problem of dual screens. I wasn't sure which one was sharing. So there are 6 items on the rubric, and I'll read them out loud. And if people have questions on them, feel free. But this rubric is not an all or nothing tool. And what I mean by that is committee members will use this to get a sense of how applications that are received perhaps compare among the group. There's no cutoff number. So if you receive, say, an X number, that means all of a sudden you're not considered. It's not that black and white of a tool. It's meant to serve as a launching pad for committee members to get a sense of the strengths and the weaknesses perhaps of an application proposal and how they can discuss and communicate them in comparison to the other ones that are received. So you can see here, and this is why the question prompted me, the organization's executive director and or program director is Latino. That's a yes or no score. There will be room for comments. And so again, that's something that the committee members really want to highlight as a pretty strong eligibility requirement. Again, if you think that there's nuance to your staff makeup and it's something that you want to highlight in your project proposal, I would suggest, if you're aware that this is an eligibility requirement that might make you ineligible, to do your best to perhaps address that and some rationale in your project description in the application. The committee members will also want to see that the organization has a track record of serving Latino Greater Hartford residents for at least 1 year through its programs. They want to get a sense that this is an organization that has experience working with the Greater Hartford Latino community, and anything that you can share in your project description to, highlight or emphasize that will be helpful for you. Number 3 is, does the proposal address the 5 equity indicators? I think this will be a pretty important one as well. So if you're scoring really low on this, on number 3, that is the one where that's really the scope and the intent of this request for proposals. So, as you're writing up your application, thinking how you can, again, really emphasize how this proposal lands in one of those equity indicators. Lastly, the next one, the proposed work is driven by input or feedback from the Latino community in the design or implementation of the proposed work. This is really to, help mitigate organizations that may be implementing programs that are not really in touch with the needs or the feedback from the residents they are serving through their program. So really to avoid this, if you will, high level or paternalistic view with no real touch points with the Latino community. I think that's what the heart of this item is to make sure that it's not someone saying, I know what's best, and implementing with no input or feedback from the residents they're serving through their programs. And then the last 2 are focused on the budget. LEF funding would have a meaningful impact on the organization's ability to implement proposed activities, and the proposed budget is reasonable and realistic. These sort of go hand in hand. It's really to, ensure that a $20,000 grant is meaningful and impactful in the request, and that what is in the budget is realistic and makes sense based on, LEF committee members' experience reviewing and funding previous budgets historically. So I wanted to share that. I'm so grateful for that question because it reminded me to just go over this rubric again. There is no cutoff. There's no internal cutoff score where if you score, say, 30 or less, you're out. This is really meant to be a tool, a starting point for discussion for committee members. And again, it will be posted on the website. I think it can be very helpful to have pulled up as you're completing an application so that you can look back and say, okay, how do I think I'm going to score on this? And, it will help you tighten up parts of your application if you are not sure on how you're landing. I'm going to stop sharing.
There's a question in the chat.
Yes.
Do you have another do you have other programs for other regions? I live and work in Texas. If I don't participate in an organization, but I am a university student, can I apply?
Thank you. Rosa, feel free to jump in if I don't answer your question correctly. So the Latino Endowment Fund is looking to fund organizations that serve Latino residents in the greater Hartford community in Connecticut. As a community foundation, we have a focus and a priority to serve our region, which we identify as 29 towns in Connecticut. We legally cannot give funding to individuals. We only give funding to programs that typically provide some sort of direct service or benefit to greater Hartford residents. If I didn't answer your question, feel free to jump in or clarify. Thanks. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. I don't mind a little awkward silence, so I'm happy to sit a little bit longer. Certainly feel free to put something in the chat. If you're not really able to be on camera and speak, that's fine too. Yeah, Kyla, I see your hands raised.
Hi, thank you for calling on me. I was the person that had asked about the director or executive director that having it to be led by a Latino of Latino descent, and I am not, and neither. There are 3 other administrators on site. We do have a board of directors, as we are a nonprofit organization in Hartford. My reasoning and the reason why I raised my hand is I feel like it's a lot of information to ask in a chat. So I figured if this is my opportunity to ask a question, I'd rather do it now than wait and regret not saying anything.
Sure.
So I am the executive director at an early childhood center in Hartford, and we serve the greater Hartford community. And with that being said, is we have many, if not, I don't have a particular ratio at this point for Latino descent for our children and families, but I do know that I was looking to apply for this grant for our staff. The Office of Early Childhood requires that our staff have particular educational requirements to meet those lead teaching roles. And I wanted to be able to offer, this grant opportunity for, maybe it's cost of a class for a couple of our students. Some of them have, some of our employees, we have 8 employees of Latino descent out of the 24 that are hired and employed. And I just wasn't sure if that was, I know I already have 1 X on the mark here that I am not of Latino descent, but all of the other requirements in that rubric seem to be very, very full. And I just wanted to be able to ask, is this something that, and if not, is there another organization or RFP that I could be directed to be able to help my employees should they just, many of them want to go back to school, but underneath of those things, their educational equity, their economic equity, they're having a hard time being able to commit to something under those circumstances.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think as you describe some background context, it's a reminder about, as we create different eligibility requirements and, in an effort to prioritize giving to Latino-led organizations, that there's elements underneath that make those decisions a bit more complex. And I think committee members certainly recognize that. And in light of that, still felt fairly strongly about this as an eligibility requirement. I think, and this is me sort of speaking as a community impact officer, how I would speak to some, whether it was this RFP or another RFP. I think at this point, it's probably best for you to decide what's worth your time and effort, knowing that this was outlined not just as a rubric item, but as an eligibility requirement in the request for proposals. I do think it could be a matter of, you know, it depends on which other programs are, you know, apply as well. If there is a strong batch of really great projects also that fit under the scope and are Latino led, or their project director or program director is of Latino descent, then that may make you your program be ineligible pretty quickly. So I think what can be a little tricky with some of these scoring items with any request for proposals is that it also depends on, you know, what else is coming in seeking funding as well. That's where the art of grant making, I think, comes in more than the science, because at the end of the day, the Hartford Foundation, whether it's a giving circle or community impact department, we have a responsibility to get the dollars out the door and into the community. And so how that happens does depend on the organizations that are seeking funding from us. So I think it's one of those things where, knowing that this is an eligibility requirement, and if you still feel strongly to apply, perhaps putting in an extra paragraph to make the case of why, despite not, you know, meeting that main rubric item, you know, what your staff looks like in terms of its racial and ethnic makeup, you know, what their roles are and how they, you know, how they fit into the program itself. I think the reason why, and certainly if there's a committee member on that wants to clarify, I don't want to speak incorrectly, certainly not on behalf of the committee members, but I think they really wanted to make sure that, you know, a lot of times, whether it's a board or staff makeup, they wanted to make sure that it was someone who had influence and power in a role that, you know, had a Latino background. You know, it very often can be the case where, you know, and I think they shared this in my last meeting with them, where people can be in roles and not really have power, influence, or voice. And so they felt that those were two staff roles where they could feel pretty confident that an executive director or a program director is one that's making decisions, leading the project, and having the ability to influence whether it's their staff or other decisions. And so that's why they chose those two roles for eligibility. But if you can make the case with your staff makeup of why you think you would still be eligible, you know, and if that's, I think that's up to you to make the decision on what's worth your time and effort versus the risk of not being considered eligible. I hope that was helpful. It was a little wordy.
It was, and I thank you for taking the time to answer it so thoroughly.
Any other questions? I'll wait for like a minute or two longer, and I won't keep anyone here any longer. So I see from the chat, can organizations get refunded if they were funded last year? On a technical level, yes, certainly. I think with any grant making process we have here, decision makers do tend to try to keep in mind, you know, who has received funding in the past. Do we want to focus somewhere else this year? It certainly, you know, isn't a huge input, and it won't hurt you to the point where it will be an absolute no, but I think it's fair to say that committee members will keep recent grant recipients in mind as they make decisions. Thank you, Christina. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to wrap this up 25 minutes early. I appreciate you all for joining. I know the committee members do as well, and Romy and Sue from development. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me offline. We can set up a time to talk. My email is in the RFP announcement if you need to contact me. Otherwise, we look forward to receiving your application submissions at the end of February, and we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.